At 2 a.m. on July 12, 2025, Russian air defense operators tracked more than 150 flying objects approaching Moscow. Minutes later, chain explosions struck a missile factory in Tula. Analysis of the wreckage, however, revealed no high-tech missiles. It revealed GPS serial numbers from civilian cars and power cells from electric bicycle batteries. This technological guerrilla tactic proved that Ukraine could strike at the heart of Russian power. But it also exposed a brutal reality. For every $500 drone launched, Russia responded by firing a $2 million missile at a Ukrainian city. Ukraine was winning battles of innovation but losing a war of financial attrition. While these explosions were happening 8,000 miles away in Washington, a bill was quietly being pushed through Congress. It targeted not a factory, but Russia's oil buyers in China and India. The goal, to cut off not just the arms supply, but the $1 billion a day flow that finances the entire war. But how a simple shift on the battlefield forced Donald Trump to confront the Kremlin directly. Proof of Ukraine's urgent need came in the form of 597 Iranian drones and 26 missiles. In one of the largest aerial barrages since the beginning of the year, Russia targeted not the front line, but cities hundreds of kilometers away, from Lviv to Chernivtsi. For families rushing to metro shelters in Kyiv, the sound of Shahed drones became the soundtrack to what President Zelensky called pure terrorism, a deliberate campaign to break the morale of the civilian population, far from any military target. But Ukraine didn't just defend itself, it responded. In a retaliatory campaign, waves of Ukrainian drones penetrated deep into Russian territory. As Moscow's air defenses were activated, other drones struck their true targets. An agricultural site in Lipetsk used to supply troops and, crucially, a military aircraft factory in Taganrog. Kyiv did not claim responsibility, but the message was unequivocal. Every Russian bombing raid would have a direct impact on Russia's war infrastructure. This exchange of fire, however, did not remain confined to the two countries. With the Russian strikes hitting just 70 kilometers from the Polish border, NATO was forced to react. Polish Air Force F-16 fighter jets were scrambled, patrolling the edge of the alliance's airspace. No missiles crossed the border this time, but Warsaw's action was a visual reminder of Europe's constant fear that a single Russian miscalculation could drag 32 nations into war. In Washington, Donald Trump's frustration with Putin's refusal to cease fire was palpable. The president, who once promised to end the war in 24 hours, now signaled interest in a new weapon, a bipartisan bill to impose sweeping sanctions on Russia. At the same time, after a pause that generated apprehension in Kyiv, the White House was preparing a new $300 million military aid package, releasing Patriot missiles and medium-range rockets. For Ukraine, the move was a breath of hope, but caution remained. Everyone awaited Trump's grand statement on Russia, which would reveal whether the pressure was real or just rhetoric. The urgency wasn't felt only in Kyiv. The war exposed a critical dependency within NATO itself. Major General John Rafferty, the leader of U.S. artillery in Europe, issued a blunt warning. 90% of the alliance's long-range firepower comes from the United States. The effectiveness of Russian missiles in striking distant targets convinced Western planners that Europe urgently needed its own eyes and fists. The question now was whether plans to deploy American Tomahawk and hypersonic missiles in Europe, agreed upon under the previous administration, would proceed under a Trump administration focused on America First. This dependence on American technology generated friction. In Berlin, a rumor that Germany planned to buy 15 more American F-35 fighter jets, in addition to the 35 already ordered, sparked a crisis with France. Paris saw the alleged purchase as a threat to the Joint European Fighter Project, the FCAS. The German government vehemently denied the plan in an attempt to calm its main ally. The episode, however, highlighted the central tension in European defense, the immediate need for combat-proven American weapons versus the long-term desire for strategic autonomy. But while NATO generals were planning military defense, a war of a different nature was about to erupt. In a combative move, President Trump announced plans for 30% tariffs on all European Union exports. The threat of a trade war that could jeopardize $9.5 trillion in trade shook European capitals. Brussels vowed to retaliate resolutely, creating a paradox at the heart of the alliance. How could the West maintain a united front against Russia if it was about to enter an economic battle with itself? This wasn't the only fracture. Within the EU itself, the 18th package of sanctions against Russia was stalled by a single country, Slovakia. Populist Prime Minister Robert Fico vetoed the measures, demanding an exemption to protect his country, which is dependent on Russian gas. The impasse exposed the central divide in European strategy, the political will to crush Putin's revenues versus the fear of economic collapse in nations still chained to Russian energy. However, amid the disputes, a sign of unity emerged in Rome. At an international conference, more than 60 countries and organizations pledged over 10 billion euros for Ukraine's future reconstruction. The agreement, which covered everything from mine clearance to energy recovery, demonstrated that despite tactical differences, the long-term commitment to having a stake in Ukraine's future remained solid. While the West debated and promised, Moscow cemented its own alliances. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met with Kim Jong-un in North Korea, declaring an invincible fighting brotherhood. The cooperation went beyond rhetoric. Western intelligence confirmed that thousands of North Korean troops were already on Ukrainian soil, and that Pyongyang was providing vital ammunition in exchange for Russian satellite technology. It was the formation of an axis of pariahs, a club of isolated nations united against the West. Despite the propaganda of a resilient economy, data from within Russia told a different story. In June, the Russian manufacturing sector contracted at its steepest pace in 3 years. At the same time, to feed its army and reward allies, the Kremlin expropriated Glav product, an American-owned canned food giant, with plans to export its products to China and North Korea. The actions revealed a war economy under immense pressure, its foundations beginning to buckle under the combined weight of sanctions and the unsustainable cost of conflict.